Okay, hello. Here I am, I think for the third time in the past 5 or 6 days, giving you an accurate update without hyperventilating, without jumping the gun, so you don't have to deal with the mess that has been the internet over the course of the past 4 or 5 hours. Trust me, you don't wanna wade into that because it's just a bunch of people trying to race to be first, disregarding accuracy. You can always wait for the dust to settle a little bit, and then you can actually speak with some authority on these things. So we've got the 49ers update on Brandon Aiyuk that is actually accurate. Matt Barrows has the article up on Athletic. The 49ers have discussed the potential Brandon Aiyuk trade with multiple teams, according to a source. But no, a trade is not agreed to, at least yet. Mike Garofalo of the NFL Network, who is also credible, said that a trade is more likely than a re-signing with the 49ers. But I think that the key throughout all of the clues that we've gathered in this ongoing saga is that it is especially unpredictable. This is more volatile than any other player situation, contract situation that I can remember, especially with the 49ers over the course of the Lynch Shanahan era. Hell, it's not even clear if Brandon Aiyuk wants to be playing somewhere else, even though he requested a trade on July 17th. But obviously, a trade has been possible throughout the course of this offseason, but especially since July 17th when Brandon Aiyuk did request it. This right here is what I wrote on July 17th. And it's what I used today in a video earlier today, just to reset the situation, to have everybody ready for any potential movement. Three options for the 49ers with their star receiver, Brandon Aiyuk, which I wrote on that day that he requested the trade. Option one was the 49ers could just stand pat because they do have negotiating leverage with Brandon Aiyuk. So they would just wait to see if he would meet them at their offer, which I understand is at about $26 or $26.5 million per year. I know that we would rather have more details, but all I know is the average per year. It's 26 or 26.5 for the 49ers. Option two for the 49ers would be to sweeten the pot beyond the $26.5 million per year. And that would theoretically bring Brandon Aiyuk into the fold more quickly to re-sign with them, but it also might compromise the 49ers' longer-term salary cap situation. They have more star players and more big contracts on their team than anyone else in the NFL. So obviously they have a very specific number in mind, and that's why option one of staying true to that number has long been the most popular 49ers option. And then there's option three, which is a trade. And a trade seems and Mike, Mike Garofalo seems to think that a trade is more likely than not at this point. So that's the latest from somebody who's talking to I think both sides here. He has some contacts on both avenues of this potential negotiation, but the trade definitely started as the less likely option. And the reason a trade starts as a less likely option is because it's hard to execute one, especially at this point in the season. So before the NFL draft, you're going to have the ability to swap draft picks and theoretically take those draft picks and make your team better with them. However, after the NFL draft, the 49ers, who have a very specific set of needs right now, it's a lot harder to make your team better because really the only way you can do that after the draft is through a player for player swap, and player for player swaps are very rare in the NFL, usually due to contract situations and the fact that signing bonuses have already been paid out. So cap hits are different for acquiring teams versus teams that are trading a player away. It's jumbled math that I'm not going to get into right now, but I'll definitely get into if and when a trade does happen and the 49ers do net a player in return for Brandon Aiyuk. Well, if that happens, then we're going to break down the numbers and we'll see how exactly the 49ers and whichever team they're negotiating with. I think that the top rumor mill name right now is the Pittsburgh Steelers, but we'll figure out exactly how that happened. But the 49ers have a very specific set of needs to make option three on the list that we put out on July 17th work, to make a trade request work. They need an impact player in return plus picks. And I think that's the 49ers demand. I think that's why nothing has been consummated at this point yet, because whatever they're being offered probably isn't good enough for the 49ers to justify moving off of Brandon Aiyuk. So they wanted that price to raise. You want to make it worth your while, because at the end of the day, the 49ers have Brandon Aiyuk under contract for 2024. It's not like they have to go into fire sale mode here. Sure, emotions might have gotten involved both ways in this situation, which can lead to the temptation of a knee-jerk reaction. It's like, okay, just get rid of him. Let's see what we can get back. But the 49ers have, I think, approached things rationally over the course of this regime. And when you take a deep breath, sit back and watch the business dynamics of this unfold in a rational fashion, you realize that the 49ers have a very good player in Brandon Aiyuk under contract. He's obviously holding in because he wants more money. They've offered him an amount of money that he obviously wants more than. So that's why this whole situation is ongoing. And since he's under contract, the 49ers do not have to rush anything. So in theory, they can wait it out until they get what they deem is a fair value in return for Brandon Aiyuk, if they do indeed decide to proceed with option 3, which is trading him. Now, if we go to the latest report that we have, they've discussed the Brandon Aiyuk trade with multiple teams. Well, if there are multiple teams involved, then theoretically the 49ers can run the price up. If it's only somebody like the Steelers involved, then obviously it's going to be a lot harder to run the sale to get the price up. But that's where the 49ers are right now, looking at their 3 options. And we're also in a position where the failures of premature reporting have been exposed like never before. 4 days ago, Brandon Aiyuk shook hands with John Lynch and hugged Kyle Shanahan. And we had an army of people on the internet saying, breaking news, the 49ers have re-signed Brandon Aiyuk. How ridiculous does that seem now? Earlier this afternoon, breaking news, the 49ers have traded Brandon Aiyuk, even though that has not yet happened. So that seems ridiculous now as well. I know that I've said this like 2 or 3 times already over the course of the past 5 or 6 days, but it's worth saying again. It's okay to sit back and actually wait for news to develop so that it's not fake, so that we don't have reports of Brandon Aiyuk re-signing with the 49ers when they actually might be closer to trading him a couple days later. It's okay to sit back and let an unpredictable situation materialize and then analyze it once it happens. I guess maybe that's a lost art now because everybody wants the clicks and they want the views and they want all that stuff, but it looks really bad when reporting fails on the level that it has over the past few days. The internet has been an absolute apocalyptic site, especially Twitter. When you look at it, it has been wild just to see how wrong some of these headlines, which have changed over time, I've noticed. But you've noticed some headlines have changed. You've noticed that stories have changed. It's been wild how many 180s there have been. And at the end of the day, it's like the boy who cried wolf, right? You could say, okay, breaking news. Okay, he re-signed with the 49ers. Oh, now he's being traded. Well, at a certain point, it's like, this is just tiresome. This is just exhausting, right? I think that's where most 49ers fans are. This is currently a standoff. It's a stalemate, if you will, that a lot of people are sick of. They want to see it end. They want to see resolution one way or the other. The last thing they want is to be dragged on an emotional roller coaster that promises them resolution. Brandon Aiyuk has re-signed with the 49ers, but then ends up delivering empty, that ends up not actually giving the resolution that it promised, which is why I promise that the best way to view this is to sit back and wait for actual substantiated news to hit. So again, no, a trade is not yet agreed to between the 49ers and whichever team they might trade Brandon Aiyuk to. It is still possible that Brandon Aiyuk re-signs with the 49ers. He is still on the 49ers roster as we speak. But when we talked about their three options, and that's coming up about 3 weeks ago when Brandon Aiyuk requested the trade, and we talked about those three options, we listed a trade as one of the possibilities. And now it is looking like that trade is indeed at the top of the list of possibilities if we're going to order it by probability. That is according to Mike Garofalo of the NFL Network. Anyway, comment section is extremely busy. I suppose that we can wade in, we can talk, we can maybe even discuss what might be a fair return for the 49ers. I have it down at the bottom of the screen. Impact player plus picks. I think that's what the 49ers want. Now, there are two components that have to be satisfied here. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier today. If you do trade Brandon Aiyuk, or if you want to trade him, in order to consummate that trade, the 49ers must be satisfied with the return coming from the other team. So they are going to want an impact player plus picks. That's, in theory, what they would want to try to become better in 2024. And Brandon Aiyuk is going to have to sign off on the trade. And that's because he's not going to go anywhere. Or let me put that another way. No team is going to give the 49ers enough draft capital, enough return to satisfy the 49ers in terms of impact player plus picks if they don't have Brandon Aiyuk under a long-term agreement. If it's only a one-year rental of Brandon Aiyuk, well, that's not going to cost a whole lot in terms of either draft capital or player capital sent back toward the 49ers. So in order for any sort of trade to work, both the 49ers and Brandon Aiyuk have to be content and on board with the stipulations. The 49ers would have to be on board with the return. Brandon Aiyuk would have to be on board with the new contract, which would presumably be more than the 49ers offered him. And I think that's around the 26 or 26.5 million. Now, it also is entirely possible. And, a trade, who knows? Who knows how this is going to end? Again, it's a very unpredictable situation, but it's entirely possible that Brandon Aiyuk wanted to be with the 49ers this whole time. And he was essentially bluffing when he requested the trade on July 17th. He was following the Deebo Samuel plan of attack. Remember when Deebo Samuel requested a trade? It was much earlier in the offseason. In fact, we even theorized that might have been the case when Brandon Aiyuk requested the trade. We said, well, nothing else worked. None of the social media antics worked. The 49ers were dug in. The 49ers were not blinking in the stare down. Brandon Aiyuk wanted to ruffle some feathers. He wanted to see if he could, maybe create a little bit of discomfort that would enable him to be on that path toward more money. So he requested the trade, even though his actual intention was just for the 49ers to up their offer. He didn't actually want to get traded, which might explain some of the stalemate that we've seen recently, right? Because, like I said, two things have to happen for a trade to work, and Brandon Aiyuk actually has to agree to it. So it'd be really funny if he requested a trade on July 17th, but then when a trade actually did materialize, or the possibility of one did materialize, he said no to it. So then he would be kind of playing both sides of the coin. And obviously that would be something that might frustrate the 49ers. So it's such a complex situation. That's why I say I don't think that we've ever seen anything like this in the Shanahan-Lynch era. Back when DeForest Buckner was traded in 2020, it seemed relatively straightforward. The 49ers had a price that they were willing to pay DeForest Buckner. The Indianapolis Colts had a much higher price that they're willing to pay him. And then the 49ers heard that they could get a first-round pick in return, and they said, okay, we're going to do that trade. I think in this scenario, what we're hearing, based on the fact that, yes, trade talks are happening, as you could see based on this report, but also based on the fact that none have been consummated, I think that the two standards, either one of the two or both of the two standards that need to be met in order for a trade to happen, have not actually been fulfilled. Either Brandon Aiyuk doesn't think that there's enough money in a potential trade with another team, and the 49ers don't think that there's been enough trade return in a potential trade with another team. So until both of those conditions are satisfied, we're going to stay in this position of limbo. I will say that it does seem that we're closer to resolution than we have been in a long time here. So, those of you waiting for this long nightmare to end, those of you who are tired of the drama, tired of the fake reports, tired of the emotional roller coaster that you're going on in this Brandon Ayuk situation, I can't promise you that this is going to be over very soon because, again, the 49ers, I don't think there's an impending deadline for the 49ers. I think that, yeah, for everybody's mental sanity, they would like to get it done sooner. But if they have to wait this out, they will. But it does feel that a resolution might be closer than it was just a few days ago, where people were reading way too deeply into handshakes and hugs on the practice field. All right, a lot of you watching right now. Why don't we move to a 49ers Q&A? And we could also give a little bit of a 49ers update before I move to the Q&A. The 49ers have made a transaction, and I joked on Twitter. It's the massive transaction that you've been waiting all afternoon for. The 49ers have signed offensive tackle Lewis Kidd, who's been with the Saints and the Colts. He takes the spot of Pat Elflein, who went on injured reserve after hurting his calf just minutes into his first practice with the team. So Lewis Kidd, new offensive tackle, new lineman for the 49ers. In fact, we can put him up on the screen right now. We can take a look at the 49ers roster to see exactly where he's going to fit in. I know that's anticlimactic. I think I got a few people on Twitter with that one. Anyway, here is the 49ers roster. Why don't you prepare some questions and then we will get to it with the Q&A. So Pat Elflein, he goes on injured reserve. That is going to be season-ending injured reserve. I'm sure they're not going to designate Pat Elflein for a return. So we'll put Pat Elflein down here onto the injury list. Unfortunately for him, he hurt his calf just minutes into that first practice with the 49ers. So now they've got a tackle. It's going to be Lewis Kidd, and he's going to be on the roster right there. Another question I have is how quickly does the Trent Williams deal get done if and when the 49ers do trade Brandon Aiyuk? Are they working on both of these things concurrently, which I would hope that they are? Do they feel that they need to dedicate more contractual focus to one until that's resolved? I don't know how many pots on the stove the 49ers have. I know that they were on the phone with Trent Williams representation right at the start of training camp. And that's really the last that we've heard as far as substantive news in that situation. But there are obviously two big outstanding pieces of contractual work that the 49ers need to get done. One is Brandon Aiyuk, either re-sign him or trade him or tell him that he's playing on the fifth-year option. And obviously Trent Williams, who's got a little bit more leverage, a lot more leverage in his negotiations with the 49ers. All right, Q&A time. I'm ready to go. We have a lot of questions. Again, everything remains on the table with Brandon Aiyuk. I think that's the main thing that people need to realize. He's still on the 49ers right now. This seems like it's the oddest contractual situation that I've ever covered. I know that emotions have definitely gotten involved I think from both sides based on my read of this situation. And when that's the case, it's probably not the best time to do business, which is probably why it would be wise. I'm saying this as an outsider right now, but it might be wise for both sides to take a step back and realize that they have time. I know that fans aren't going to like to hear that because people are just dying for this to end. But when I bring up that there's option one, option two, and option three, that's something that I intentionally do because this is a situation that you cannot cover accurately without acknowledging that there are multiple paths forward and it could still take either of those paths, which is why it's so crazy that there's been so much premature reporting about specific paths, because this has been the ultimate odd, weird situation that has maintained a high probability, I think, of multiple different things happening. Normally, you can kind of put your finger on these things. And I think early in the Brandon Aiyuk negotiation, it was very much looking like it was going to be a okay, he's going to re-sign with the 49ers. They're going to find a good price and they're going to move forward. But we covered it all off season. The receiver market got weird. I think that a lot of friction was created by the Justin Jefferson contract. And there are other deals too, the Amon-Ra St. Brown contract, A.J. Brown. But when Jefferson signed his deal, it created such a chasm, such a gravitational force at one end of the receiver market that it was inevitable that a team like the 49ers, who had a very tight budget for very obvious reasons, would not would there just be negotiation polarization. It was inevitable that they would not be seeing things eye to eye with a receiver who obviously would have his demands being pulled gravitationally by the expanding receiver market. So you ended up having this non-eye to eye scenario where Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers drifted further and further apart in what they saw as an ideal setup for their relationship to continue. And I think that's where we're at right now. Right. And that's why it's unresolved right now, is because there are obvious incentives for the 49ers to keep Brandon Aiyuk around, but there are also obvious incentives for Brandon Aiyuk to look to enriching himself in a spot where he could get more money. And the negotiation has turned personal, and the negotiation has gotten to a place where we have the mess that was social media and was the media in general on Monday afternoon. All right, I can answer questions. They don't have to be about Brandon Aiyuk. I think that we've delved into this situation as deeply as we possibly can. So let's get after this in the 49ers Q&A after the update on Brandon Aiyuk. Ryan, no one has talked about special teams, particularly Moody. How has he looked throughout training camp? Jake Moody has looked really good throughout training camp. The other day, he knocked through 4 field goals, and that improved his camp tally to 27 of 30, which is 90%. Last year, Jake Moody made 81% of his field goals in the season, and he definitely did not make 90% of his kicks in training camp. He missed quite a few in training camp. So Moody has been really good. I think we're seeing the second-year bump. 90% is what you love to see at practice. And we saw Harrison Butker re-sign with the Kansas City Chiefs today. Jake Moody's still a while away from potentially re-signing with the 49ers. But if he continues kicking at a 90% clip into the regular season and into 2025, that's something that the 49ers might be very interested in doing. Moody's also going to have an interesting job with the new kickoff rule. Directional kicks are going to be a thing that he's going to be asked to do. Based on everything that we've heard from the 49ers, he's pretty good at those directional kicks. It's not about pure leg strength anymore. It's about finding a way to angle the kick into the receiving zone so that your coverage unit has the best possible chance at being efficient. You've been watching me for years, and you never heard me speak a negative on the 49ers. Well, then you've been watching me for years, but you haven't been listening. Since I was the first one to talk about the 49ers pass protection issues, this is back in 2019, highly critical of their pass protection for years. Last year, I led the charge in discussing how poorly the 49ers were performing on run defense. There was absolutely nobody talking about that until I started that conversation. So those are just 2 examples for you. So just why don't you do a better job listening if you do indeed watch for several straight years? Mike asks, what is Brandon Aiyuk's value? Very valuable, because he's one of the best X receivers in the game. That being said, this is a really good question because we can get deep into the nuances of things as far as belief in Brock Purdy, belief in the rest of the skill position weapons that the 49ers have, belief in Kyle Shanahan's system and their offensive structure in general. The 49ers had 4 1,000 all-purpose yard players on their offense last year. Brandon Aiyuk was obviously one of them. His statistics are fantastic. His efficiency is off the charts. I've shown his XY axis of his separation grade and his yak grade, all that stuff put him in the upper right hand corner of those charts, which is great. But the truth of the matter is that the 49ers also had a bunch of other guys, and they still do have a bunch of other guys that can produce on the offensive side of the football. And they also have a quarterback who's an MVP finalist who, anybody who's paying attention, anybody who knows just a little bit about quarterback play knows that Brock Purdy is really damn good. So when you're the 49ers, you have to do a cost benefit analysis. Obviously, you are better with Brandon Aiyuk in the offense. I mean, he's a very good receiver. But you start to calculate, okay, how much worse, if you're the 49ers, you say, how much worse are we without Brandon Aiyuk in the offense? And if we can get a different piece in return, say an offensive lineman, maybe another receiver, how much slack can that piece pick up? And then will the rest of the trade return justify the downgrade that the departure of Brandon Aiyuk would cause? That's the question the 49ers have to ask themselves. And if they believe that Brock Purdy is good enough and the rest of the weapons are good enough to pick up that slack, then they're in position and strong position to make a trade. That means they're in position, and it's a risk. I get it. It's absolutely a risk. But that's what we talked about in our options 1 through 3 when we were discussing the Brandon Aiyuk trade request on July 17th. We said that certain specific conditions would have to be satisfied, and a lot of the conditions are dependent on the 49ers' belief in Brock Purdy, the belief in Kyle Shanahan, and the belief in the rest of their weapons. It ultimately boils down to, is Aiyuk expendable or not? Obviously, somebody like Trent Williams is not expendable, which is why he has that stranglehold of leverage against the 49ers. Somebody like Nick Bosa was not expendable, which is why he ultimately won that negotiation with the 49ers, and they caved right before the season opener against Pittsburgh last year. Somebody like Brandon Aiyuk, I think, is definitely expendable to an extent. He's a really damn good player that makes you better, but he's not irreplaceable like a Nick Bosa or a Trent Williams. Where exactly that value sweet spot is up for debate, and it's something that's an inexact science. And yes, the 49ers are going to have to use their gut feeling on some of this, but there is some data to show that receivers, especially if they're part of an offense that has other really good receivers and other capable targets, they're obviously not going to have as much impact on winning and losing as the best offensive lineman on your team or an edge rusher, which is a highly impactful position. So obviously, in general, we know that Aiyuk's value is lower than Trent Williams and Nick Bosa's, but how much lower is it to the 49ers? Well, we'll find out what they think if they do trade him based on the return that they get. Is Troy Fotanu out of the question from offensive lineman out of Washington? Well, he's a first-round pick, and that means he got a big signing bonus. It's really tough to expect first-round picks to be traded because of the massive signing bonus that they got. That's all been paid for by the team that drafted them. So that team would incur massive amounts of dead money trading those picks, to where, especially if they had to give out a big contract to Brandon Aiyuk, would be really, really hard to justify. So I think that's a tougher kind of situation. Who was dropped to make room for Lewis Kidd? Pat Elflein was moved to injured reserve. That was the lineman who came in and hurt his calf. All right, let's ask some good questions. I'm scanning through some of these. I don't want to put the bad questions on. This is a good one. Does Tariq Owens have a chance at sticking with the practice squad. I think he's got a chance. I think he's got work to do. I think he's got to show a little bit or a lot in those preseason games. It's only August 5th, though, so there's still a lot of time. We've seen 10 training camp practices so far. Still a long way to go here throughout the course of August. Can I elaborate why I believe Trent Williams has any leverage? He has 3 years left on his deal and would be 39 when it ends. From the 49ers perspective, why would they renegotiate besides small cap space? Well, Trent Williams has leverage because he could say, I'm not showing up unless you give me more money. And he has credibility behind that threat because he's 36 years old. So retirement is completely plausible. And he'd be a first ballot Hall of Famer if he retired. I mean, he's a walking first ballot Hall of Famer right now. And he's got plenty of money in the bank to show the 49ers that he could be serious on that threat. So that's leverage in and of itself right there. Somebody like Brandon Aiyuk can't threaten to walk away from the game without the 49ers spitting out their drink laughing. Somebody like Trent Williams can. So again, it's like I am altering the deal. Pray that I don't alter it any further from The Empire Strikes Back. It's one of those situations where the 49ers are in a bind. They need Trent Williams really badly. I get it. He's under contract for 3 more years, but he can alter that contract because the alternative for the 49ers, Trent Williams not showing up at all, is not very pretty. Now they could try to call his bluff, I suppose. But do you really want to do that? Can you really afford to do that? Because this could last into the regular season if you try to do that. And then Brock Purdy not only can struggle with the added pressure of not having Trent Williams there, but he can also get hurt. I mean, you're starting to really play with fire at that position. So Trent Williams is in a highly consequential position. He has a lot of leverage, and the 49ers must proceed knowing that in this situation. It's way more consequential than Brandon Aiyuk's spot on this football team, just based on where he's playing position-wise. I don't think that tight end 2 is going to be Mason Pline. I think Mason Pline might be headed for the practice squad, or he'll squeak onto that roster. That's possible. But Eric Saubert is likely going to be tight end 2 for the 49ers. With Aiyuk gone, who plays X? Well, unless the 49ers get a receiver in return, if Brandon Aiyuk does leave in the trade, then Chris Conley has been the X so far in training camp. I think he's a really solid veteran X option. He's not a superstar like Brandon Aiyuk, but I think that Chris Conley would definitely see a lot more playing time at that X receiver position. Now, this is where the Ricky Pearsall development becomes a key portion of the discussion. The 49ers rookie first round pick is being cross-trained to play multiple positions. I think in a way, he could be a little bit of that hybrid between the X and the Z position, which Deebo Samuel plays. Maybe even play a little bit of F, which is that slot receiver position. So Ricky Pearsall, the 49ers picked because he's a smooth operator with how he moves, but they also love how strong his base is. He can separate. So where will Ricky fall into this entire equation? You have a prototypical X in Chris Conley that can be a fill-in for Brandon Aiyuk. But I think that you would hope that your first-round draft pick and Ricky Pearsall can start to pick up some of that slack as the season progresses. Looking for more good questions. It's a lot of people in chat right now, so that means there's a lot of chat messages that are not questions. I would not say that D Winters is the favorite for linebacker 3. No. I would well, okay, hold on. First, I'm assuming that you're speaking of the start of the season without Dre Greenlaw. I think Devondre Campbell's the favorite for number 2 in that scenario behind Fred Warner. At number 3, I would think that the favorite is Demetrius Flanagan-Foles, but the rising challenger behind him, whose odds are improving, is D. Winters. So the 49ers need to establish a floor at that position. And usually young players have a higher ceiling but a lower floor. But for a really good team, it's important to raise the floor. So I would say that the favorite is currently DFF, Flanagan-Foles, but D. Winters is on a good track to close that gap and maybe even overtake that position by the start of the season. We are Nashville on Saturday. We're going to have the meetup in Nashville on Saturday. Let me get that information for everybody and maybe even put that on the screen. I think that it's time to do that. Margot is organizing, and she sent me all the information the other day. I just have to find it. Here it is. The Lombardi Lounge meetup. It's going to be happening the day before the game in Nashville. So, well, actually, I have it on YouTube here. We'll share a screen and get it for you guys. Have to go to the community page. And good, we have it. Boom. Here comes the dramatic reveal of the first ever Lombardi Lounge YouTube podcast meetup is coming this week, a day ahead of the 49ers preseason game against the Titans. You come hang out with me, Margot, and our friends, and all your 49ers fan friends. No sign up is necessary. Just show up. It's going to be on Friday, August 9th, 5 to 7 Central Time in Nashville at the Barlines Bar in the Omni Hotel, right around the corner from Broadway. So I know there's a lot of 49ers fans, Californians out in Tennessee who live out there now. I also know that there might be some 49ers fans in for the game. So go ahead and write this down and see you there. I think it could be a lot of fun. Maybe we'll have this Brandon Aiyuk situation resolved by the time that this happens on Friday evening. Purdy's looking jacked. Have you seen that translate to the field yet? Yeah, I mean, he's thrown with more velocity. We haven't seen him have to break any tackles or shed sacks yet, but that's going to be something he has to do during the regular season. There's nothing wrong with being stronger. That's something I reported already a couple months ago. So I'm glad to see that people are noticing it now. Who's the more important signing, in my opinion? Trent Williams or Brandon Aiyuk? Definitely Trent Williams. This team can win the Super Bowl, I think, without Brandon Aiyuk. I could see them being able to creatively replicate his production. They might lose obviously lose a little bit, but I don't even know what a potential trade return would be because nothing has actually happened yet. But with Trent Williams, it's borderline impossible, if not impossible, to see his production being replaced. What will the offense look like without Brandon Aiyuk? If Aiyuk is not there, we have to put an if in front of everything right now because nothing is settled. The concrete has not dried on this. A lot of people have wanted news to break over the last 7 days to the point where they've prematurely reported it, but it actually hasn't happened. So what will the offense look like without Brandon Aiyuk? Well, it's going to look like the 49ers offense. It's going to look the same. Brandon Aiyuk does not run this offense. Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy do. So the offense is the offense. They haven't changed the offense for Brandon Aiyuk. In fact, if there's one player who has defined the offense, not outside of the quarterback position, who has molded the offense according to his own skill set. It's not Brandon Aiyuk, it's Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel has been the far more impactful player in that regard because he's got such a unique play style. Brandon Aiyuk is your man-beating X wide receiver. He could beat that man coverage. He's really good at it. He's obviously a really good blocker as well. He does so many things fantastically for this 49ers offense. But as far as uniqueness goes, Deebo Samuel's a much more unique player. Probably the best after the catch that we've seen in NFL history. And the 49ers have legitimately moved pieces around on their offense to accommodate his skill set. So when we talk about a potential future without Brandon Aiyuk on this 49ers offense, what will it look like? It's not going to look different. It's not going to be as good, obviously. Like, Brandon Aiyuk is a really good player, but you don't change your strategy offensively over the 49ers. You're still going to be outside zone base, play action offense moving off of that, utilizing different weapons at different levels of the field. And it's an assorted skill set of adaptable skill position weapons. That's the machine. Changing one part of it, which would be Brandon Aiyuk, yeah, you're losing a premium part, but it's not going to change the look of the larger machine. As Being Butterfly says, Deebo is one of one. That is correct. Does the O-line look better this year or last year, or better this year than last year? It's a good question, man. It's a really good question. Trent Williams needs to come back. If he doesn't, then it's definitely looking worse than last year. So they have to get that contract situation done. As far as the rest of the front, well, they're hoping for improvement from Colton McKivitz at right tackle. Second year starting, I think that's a legitimate ask. I don't think that's unrealistic. And then I thought there were a lot of down years across the line for the 49ers last year. I don't think Aaron Banks had a great year. I think the turf toe hurt him. I think Jake Brendel was a lot worse in 2023 than he was in 2022. So can he be better at center, or will the 49ers shuffle things differently? And can somebody like Dominic Pooney, who you added in the draft, give you an immediate upgrade at the right guard position? Brandon Staley, I'm going to post an interview from Brandon Staley a little bit later this evening. I talked to all the assistant coaches today. So Brandon Staley was one of them. I think that he's a very, very smart defensive mind. What's really interesting to me about Brandon Staley is that he's got the personnel on this 49ers defense, especially in the secondary, and he's working mainly with the DBs to implement some of the same adaptable strategies that he used with the Rams, with Jalen Ramsey in 2020, played both outside and inside cornerback, and with Derwin James with the Chargers, who was playing safety and then coming up in more of a nickel man coverage role. Deommodore Lenoir is playing that star position that Jalen Ramsey did, playing on the outside and the inside, shuffling around to where he needs to go. And somebody like Malik Mustafa, I asked Brandon Staley about his potential adaptability today, and his answer was really interesting. So stay tuned for those interviews, and that content will be coming up on the channel a little bit later tonight. Those of you who are just joining right now, I know that we probably will have new crowd coming in. It's 5:30 on the West Coast, 8:30 on the East Coast. We have an actually accurate 49ers update regarding Brandon Aiyuk. I know that might be surprising because the vast majority of updates regarding Brandon Aiyuk have been inaccurate. But no, a trade is not agreed to, at least yet. Now, this is a very odd situation because Brandon Aiyuk literally requested a trade in July 17th. So that, I think, put us into overdrive, preparing for the possibility, since it was one of the three options. But we also have to realize that Brandon Aiyuk has to be on board with any potential trade that the 49ers do potentially execute, because otherwise the 49ers won't get the trade return that they're going to want in this situation. Multiple parties have to be satisfied. And that means Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers would have to be satisfied, and the other team, in any potential trade. And no agreement has been reached with any team yet, despite the fact that we've seen failures of premature reporting on a scale that has never been witnessed before in 49ers reporting history. It has been epically bad over the course of the past several days, from thinking that a hug meant a Brandon Aiyuk re-signing to all that we saw on the internet today. Oh my God, this is a done deal. This is done. No, it's not a done deal, because what the 49ers need in a trade and what Brandon Aiyuk would need as far as a new contract in a trade, those things haven't been finalized, at least yet. So if the 49ers can find a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers to meet them with what they need, and I think the 49ers would need an impact player and picks, and if Brandon Aiyuk can find enough money from a team like that, then yes, maybe this is going to go forward. But at this point, it has not yet happened. So that's your 49ers update on Brandon Aiyuk. Everybody, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you very soon. I'll be on board as soon as an actual update materializes again. We're just going to keep it real. That's been the strategy throughout all of this chaos, and that's going to be the strategy moving forward. Everybody hit that subscribe button. Maybe hit the like button. You could leave your comment. You could predict in the comment section what you think is going to happen, but I'll talk to you all very soon.